Okay, so welcome to your flipped classroom preparation for lesson 3. So in this session, we'll look at the beginnings of the so we'll briefly look at how did the Cold War start through the Yalta Conference, Potsdam Conference, Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, which is famous, and then a quick look at East versus West. How did this happen? Okay. So the Yalta Conference came about towards the end of the Second World War. It hadn't quite ended, but Germany weren't doing well, and it was obvious that the Allies were winning and Germany was losing. So in this picture, the big three, we see the three key leaders there of the Allies. We've got Churchill with his cigar, Roosevelt, President of the States, and Stalin of the USSR. Okay. They met in the Ukraine, so Yalta is in the southern tip of the Crimea there in red in that picture. And when they met, they were planning to decide what to do with Europe when Germany lost. So when the end of World War II came, what were they going to do? So this was the conference. In this conference, we see that there were some differences of opinion, but generally it was a successful conference. They agreed on various issues, which are in bullet points down the slide. Okay, so you can go back and have a look at that. But basically, one of the big things they decided was that Germany, once they lost, would be divided into 4 zones. So you've got those 3 countries there plus France. And Berlin would also be divided because Berlin fell within the Soviet quarter of Germany. One point that they didn't agree on totally was Poland. So Russia felt that the borders of the USSR should move more westward into Poland, and Poland should move even further westward. Stalin was not in agreement with Churchill and Roosevelt on that. Churchill and Roosevelt weren't happy, but there wasn't much they could do. So at this point, Russia had come quite far into Europe to help try and defeat Germany. So actually the Russian Red Army came, if you follow the arrow, came quite far in all the way up till the German border. So there wasn't much that Churchill and Roosevelt could do, and they just had to let that happen. But they made Stalin promise that he wouldn't interfere in Greece, which is down here. And Greece wouldn't become communist because Britain had interests there. So overall, they were able. You can see the Yalta Conference is quite successful. They were able to negotiate and do business with one another. So that's one opinion. If we look at this quote here, this is Stalin at the conference one evening. They all sit around the table after all their business, have some food, have some drink. So this is a toast that he proposed. Here he uses choice words like alliance, intimacy, free expression of views. I know of no such close alliance of 3 great powers as this. Strong, stable. So this is positive talk from Stalin. If we left it there, we'd think, wow, this is fantastic. They all got on. Why ever was there a Cold War? It was all going really well. What I want to encourage you is to look, always when you're looking at a source, look at the bold print and see who is saying it, what is the context in which they're saying it, who are they saying it to, who is the audience, or what is the audience, and when was it, okay? So bear that in mind when you look at this next one. Okay, so immediately we see this next one is still Stalin again, but his audience is different. He's speaking to a fellow communist. Jalas was a supporter of Stalin. Look at his difference in language here. He uses this word allies, but here there's nothing they like better than to trick their allies. And he mentions Churchill. He hasn't forgotten what Churchill is like. There is a deep distrust there between Stalin and Churchill. So look at Churchill's response then. Again, look at the bold first. Churchill is writing to Roosevelt. So this isn't done in public. This is a private letter sent to his buddy, Roosevelt. This is just after the Yalta Conference. He also uses words like danger. The Soviet Union has become a danger to the free world. A settlement must be reached on all major issues between West and East in Europe before the armies of democracy melt. So what's happening? Between the yellow, the green, and the blue sources, there are different perspectives. This is one of the key, this is one of our related concepts and one of the key issues, things that I want you to be considering when you're looking at different sources, is think about the different perspectives. Why is it like this? Why are the perspectives different? Okay, and look at these different things before you make your judgment. So was the Yalta Conference successful? So 5 months later, we have the end of the Second World War. And the Second World War went well for the Allies. In May 1945, the Allies reached Berlin, Hitler committed suicide, and Germany surrendered. So the war in Europe was won. A couple of months after that, then, they had their second conference, which is Potsdam. So Potsdam was held just outside of Berlin in Germany. Okay, but there were some big changes. Immediately, if you look at that picture of the leaders sat there, different guys. Stalin's still there on the right. In the middle, we have Truman, President Truman, who has replaced Roosevelt. Roosevelt died. And on the left, then we have Clement Attlee, who was the new Prime Minister, replaced Winston Churchill, okay, because he was elected out of Parliament. So halfway through this conference, Attlee came in. So if you look at Potsdam Conference, half of the time it will be Churchill, the other half it will be Attlee. Okay, so there were some changes we've put there, that I've put there in bullet points. So since Stalin's army came across Germany to liberate Germany, liberated various countries like Finland, Poland, Romania, but when they came in and freed them from the Nazis, he didn't withdraw his army. So Stalin's army was still there, and he had a heavy presence in Eastern Europe. Not only that, he also installed communist governments in these places. So this was not good for the Allies. And in addition, this new president, Truman, was deeply suspicious of Stalin, and he was very anti-communist. So this caused a bit of a problem. Also, during the time between Yalta and Potsdam, the Americans had tested their atomic bomb. So this was the point at which Truman decided to tell Stalin, oh yeah, we tested a bomb, it works. So again, there's a bit of friction, a bit of tension between these leaders. Whereas in Yalta, they've been able to agree on many things, at Potsdam, they weren't. There was a lot of disagreements, mostly over how to handle Germany. So the USSR had lost 20 million men during the war. And Stalin was worried and fearful for his own country. He didn't want Germany to become strong again. He wanted to protect his country as much as he could. That's why he left his armies in most countries in Eastern Europe. And that also means that at the end of the war, he wanted to cripple Germany, claim compensation in terms of money and land, and not allow Germany to become strong again. But on the other hand, Truman felt completely the opposite. He didn't want Germany to be crippled because he didn't want a repeat of history of what had happened at Versailles after the First World War. So they never came to a complete decision on that one. So leading on from that then, although Churchill was no longer Prime Minister, he was still in on the scene of politics. So he has this infamous speech called the Iron Curtain speech. So look at this source here. What can you see? First of all, it tells us that this is a British cartoon in the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper. So the British allegiance mostly is towards the West, towards America. And as a capitalist country, again, quite anti-communist. And look at the date here, 1946. This is about a year after Potsdam. So we see in this picture this guy kneeling down, trying to peek underneath this iron curtain. This figure is Churchill. It's supposed to be Churchill. Look at his cigar out of his mouth. That's his iconic pose. What else can you see from the picture? Tell me what you see and what do you think that means. Here the sign says no admittance by order Joe. Who's Joe? Joseph Stalin. Okay. Quite often, particularly in British cartoons, you might see Joe. That is referring to Joseph Stalin. Here on the other side, we know that this must be the East because of the sign saying Russia. What does it look like? So what can you infer from that? It's smoky, it's dark, it looks very industrial, but not necessarily in a positive way, with a communist flag. And along the top of the Iron Curtain are men, barbed wire, trying to keep people out. And maybe keep people in. Because look at this guy here, he looks like he's just running away from the scene. And people here trying to look in. There's a curiosity, there's a definite distinction between the two sides. And the Iron Curtain has come down across a railway track, it's come down across Europe. It looks like, you know, it's cutting through land. So there's a lot that you can infer from that. The more that you know and understand about the history and about the concepts, the more that you can use that source to support your arguments or discuss it in a way that demonstrates your knowledge of conflict at this time. So this is Winston Churchill's speech. Again, look at where and when and who. So he's doing it in the USA in the presence of President Truman, 1946. So this speech in itself is very capitalist, it's very pro-America, and it's not in favor of Russia. So he's saying a shadow has fallen, an iron curtain has descended. Behind that line lie all the states of Central and Eastern Europe. This is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build, nor is it one which allows permanent peace. So he's not saying it's he's not saying this is a positive thing. There's a definite divide between East and West Europe. Stalin also has a reply. So in his reply to this to Churchill, it tells us what Stalin's thinking. The Germans made their invasion of the USSR through Finland, Poland, and Romania. So he's defending his actions, saying if we don't protect Eastern Europe, we may be attacked again, Russia may be attacked again, because the Germans came through, invaded through these countries, and maybe they will do it again. So here he's using words like anxious for future safety. We can see that Stalin is defending his actions and defending what is happening, all in a good for Russia. Okay, so again, with every source, try and look at the balanced perspective. Next one. So finally, what we can say is by 1946, the one-time Allied friendship between the USA and the USSR has now broken down. It's been replaced by suspicion and accusation. There was a deep distrust between the two countries, so great that both the leaders were talking in public about the threat of war. between the two countries. Normally when countries end a war, they kind of stop buying as many weapons and start to descale. But in this instance, both sides actually increased their stockpile of weapons at this time. So this only helped to fuel the suspicion, fuel the fear and the distrust between the two countries. They publicly denounced each other's policies and plans. So a propaganda war developed between the two. And this can be seen, as we'll look at throughout the unit, various physical conflicts came about because of this ideological conflict between the East and the West, which is based on the very beginnings of fear, of suspicion of what each other's doing. So for your questions, just to reflect on what you've learned just now. So you've still maybe got 5 more minutes to jot down some answers to these. Why were the USA and USSR suspicious of each other? So think about Yalta, Potsdam. Think about what happened at the end of World War II. Why did they become suspicious of each other? Why was Roosevelt's death a turning point? What did the Iron Curtain represent? And then finally go back to the last 2 cartoons on East versus West. What messages are they trying to convey to the audience? Okay, so think about what is it trying to say and what do you think is the message there to the people looking at it, to you, to the audience. Okay, thank you for listening and I'll see you next lesson.